Today we're going to talk about brands and rustling, and some about how it affected Gila County and the ranchers in Gila County. Branding of cattle goes all the way back to 2000 BC, when the pharaohs branded their cattle and their slaves. In early 1500s, after Cortez defeated the Aztecs in Mexico, they started cattle ranches down there, and Cortez had one of the first ranches, and his brand was 3 crosses in a row. Branding became important after the Civil War because all of the men had been gone to war, and they were estimating there was 7 million cattle running loose in Texas. None of them branded. If anybody wanted to claim them, they had to brand them. They were worth essentially nothing in Texas. They had to be driven to market, which means they had to be branded to prove ownership when they went through other open range, to keep other people from saying, "Oh, you've got my cows, I'm just going to take them." So they put what they call a trail brand on the herds, because many of the herds were put together from different ranches and they all had different brands, so they had to have one single brand to prove that they had the right to have those cattle. But there was still people, when they were driving them to market, who decided they had more right to those cattle than what the trail outfit had, and they had to fight off rustlers then. Rustling came about in many, many forms. You had homesteaders who wanted to feed their families, so they would just go out and take a young steer and butcher it. It was still thievery. Then you had small ranchers wanting to get started. They would be running on open range with the big ranchers. And one way to have a bigger ranch than when they started was to take the calves from the big ranch and make them their own. That's where the changing of the brands came in, branding mavericks that were essentially unbranded calves that had gotten big. When they went to brand, say, a maverick, and the cowboy was going along and he found an unbranded big calf that had been missed in the roundup, they used what they call a running iron, which was just a shortened piece of steel that was either straight or had an L-shaped end on it that they could carry comfortably on their saddle or in their chaps pocket. They would heat that up, put the brand on they wanted to, or if they were trying to steal that calf that had already been branded, they would use the same running iron to try to alter the brand into something that they could say was their brand. Sometimes the running iron was used to blot out a brand, where they would just smooth it over to where the existing brand could not be read, and then they put their brand on, and then it became an argument of his say against my say, and that's how quite often it ended up with who had the bigger pistol. With open range, ranchers and homesteaders never ate their own beef. They could just go out and get a maverick or get the neighbor's young steer, butcher it, take it home, and that's what they ate. You didn't eat your own beef. And one way to make a small ranch into a bigger ranch was to have an exceptionally good calf crop every year, even if it meant you were branding the big guys' calves and calling them your own. A lot of times the big ranchers would make a deal with the foreman because the foreman was quite often somebody who wanted to start his own ranch, and he would make a deal for that foreman to be paid in cattle, especially in calves. But that was a good way to make sure that a big outfit didn't have a good profit, because that foreman was working more to get his own steers or calves than he was taking care of the boss's cattle. Many of the cowboys couldn't read or write, but they could read brands, and they were out on the range so much there was nothing else to do except tell stories, sit around, BS. And one of their favorite things was sitting there trying to figure out how they could alter brands. And they could do that pretty well. And that brings us up to what really happened in Gila County, which is actually at that time Yavapai County in Pleasant Valley, when the Pleasant Valley War came about. Pleasant Valley War essentially came about because you had a whole bunch of ranchers wanting to be bigger ranchers, and to do it, they decided they would just steal cattle. And James Stinson moved into the area. He was a big cattleman from up on top of the rim. He brought 2,000 head of beef. And he had a simple brand. Just a simple T brand. It was amazing how many cattlemen all of a sudden had a similar brand made up with a T in it. This top one was C.C. Slaughter's Long Lazy S. In the black is his brand, Long Lazy S, laying down. Some artistic cowboy decided he could change that, and these little blue dots shows how he changed that Long Lazy S into the ace of clubs when he got through drawing with his running iron. Next one down is a Texas brand, JJ, and they altered that with these blue hooks here and that cross piece into the SHS connected. One interesting thing I saw, John Rhodes, who was a cowman in the Pleasant Valley War up at Pleasant Valley, who had come from Texas, was branding the JJ in Pleasant Valley during the Pleasant Valley War. This one down here is the famous XIT ranch, which was made up of 3 million acres in Texas. The XIT brand stands for 10 in Texas because that ranch was made up of all of or part of 10 different counties in Texas, all joined together. And the way one thief altered that brand was he made it the boxed XITF, just by making a few little adjustments there. In Gila County, in early 1880s, there was a rancher up there named Lewis Parker on Hagler Creek. He had a neighbor whose name was William Atchison, and Atchison's brand was the bar Open A. This is an Open A bar. Parker designed the brand to cover that Open A and change it to the bar X, just by adding these two little things right here. The bar X ranch is still in operation today and has been ever since 1884. This is another famous Texas brand. This was the original hash knife brand the way it was in Texas. When they came to northern Arizona, up on top of the rim, as the Aztec Land and Cattle Company, they flipped that hash knife around to where the T was on top. When James Stinson moved 2,000 head into Pleasant Valley, his brand was a simple T. There was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different brands that could be made out of that simple T. Some of them were pretty famous people from the Pleasant Valley War. Jesse Ellison, his ranch has always been called the Q Ranch. All of a sudden he was branding cattle TEQ. The hash knife, the Aztec Land and Cattle Company flipped their brand around so that the T was on top. Albert Rose did the R bar. T is right there. Over here we've got Tom Graham and Ed Tewksbury. Tom Graham and Ed Tewksbury had been hired by James Stinson, who was an absentee owner. They were supposed to watch over his cattle. They were going to be paid in cattle. So to brand the cattle they were going to be paid, they were supposed to register the TE. Graham decided he was cheated partner Tewksbury and registered the TE in only his name. So that started another little fight right there. Then John and Tom Graham had the JT. Lydia Tewksbury had LT. James Tewksbury did the JP. And they pretty much put James Stinson out of business because none of his calves were getting branded the right brand. Just playing around with that simple T and what you could do with it in other ways. Like this one's a double box. Just by enclosing it, it makes 2 boxes. This one you can make the 4 square. This one over here is the box triangles, 1, 2, 3, 4 triangles, all starting from that simple T brand. And rustling still happens today. There are states like Oklahoma, Texas, some in Kansas that have entire investigative units that deal with rustling and equipment theft. You still have people who get down on their luck and decide, well, they need to feed the family, they're going to go out and take a single calf. And with the new tools available to everybody, they can kill a calf and have it quartered and in the ice chest in 15 minutes with battery-driven sawzalls that just go zip, zip, zip and get it loaded and we're gone. I worked a farm for years in the east. We ran 100 cows. We didn't brand a single one. And when we would take cattle to the market, we just loaded a stock trailer, took them to the market, told them what farm we were from. They ran them through the sale. Of course, the check was made out to the farm name, but there could still be people picking up cattle out of somebody's little paddock, put them on a stock trailer, go to the market, run them through there, get a check in somebody's name that they get it cashed. And a lot of these guys that have these cattle in these smaller paddocks like that, especially in the east, they're not branded. They're working a job in town to make ends meet. Some of them don't even check but once, maybe twice a week on their cattle to see how they're doing. They don't even know for, say, 2 weeks that they're missing 8 of them, which is about what fits in a normal stock trailer. So it still happens. They still investigate it. That's all part of the cattle business.